All right. And welcome back, you guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I am your host, Corey Hageman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. As always, those of you who rate, review, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell notification. I really appreciate it. It helps more than realistically it probably should, but it's a very simple act. And let me just say I noticed. So thank you. Thank you for that. Today, in this solo episode, we are covering a topic that, you would think kind of like with the evolution of the different divisions and how the female divisions have progressed, that it wouldn't still really be such an issue. But it's something that comes across my table, metaphorically, my screen, quite often. And that is individuals who feel like they might have outgrown the bikini division. Individuals who are like, I have been told, or I feel, or my coach thinks that I should do one of the higher up divisions. So for listeners who aren't familiar, there is NPC fit model. That is like truly basic entry level bikini type look. Then there is the bikini look, which I think at this point, like the actual video I did breaking down the fit model versus bikini division and like kind of making sense of both of them, I think that should already be out. I may have even done like the whole solo episode at this point. That might be out as well. So if you're interested in just a comparison, really in the opposite way of like, should you pick fit model or bikini? Those videos are for you. This video today, this is for the individual who's like, I don't know. I don't know if, I'm, just wasting my time in the bikini division. Is it smarter if I potentially move to wellness, figure, women's physique? So that's what we're diving into. So maybe you've been told your shape isn't bikini, you have too much muscle, your waist isn't small enough, or hey, if you start competing, you would outgrow bikini very quickly if you kept training this hard. If any of this sounds familiar, or you're just uncertain because you're a first-time competitor and you're like, I don't know, I've been told I'm muscular, I feel muscular, I don't feel as like itty bitty as, my friends or these girls that I see online that do bikini. Keep listening, because today that is everything that we're covering. I'm gonna break down bikini versus wellness versus women's physique, and just give you my 2 cents on like really the decision-making process for the individual. I mean, largely the individual who's like, I feel like I'm too big for bikini, even though they haven't competed yet. Hopefully through this, I can give you a better idea of what the requirements are. Hopefully some food for thought on like what that actually looks like in terms of prognosis, a trajectory. And if you are currently in bikini, hopefully you can use this information to really make an informed decision before you make a switch. Now, let me be clear. I have good friends in both of these other divisions, and I admire the fuck out of them. Like it's just so impressive, like what they're able to do with their body. But even them, I have had very intimate conversations with them off camera as well as on camera. And if you're interested in any of those interviews, just go through the guest list. Like you'll see, I've had professional figure competitors on here kind of going through what it takes at that level. Even they will say that it's not a small ask. And even for individuals who come to them who want to be coached because they want to be figure, a lot of the times they find themselves steering them away, or having to have a very realistic conversation that like, you might not have the propensity to build this amount of muscle. And I've had these same conversations on the inverse, just with individuals who want to do bikini, who I'm like, this is like a big commitment you're going to make. But it's even more so when we're talking about wellness and figure. And just to be clear, it's not that I don't respect women's physique. I think like those girls are monsters in like the most complimentary way possible. It's so impressive. But I think for listeners, I think like this is already going to segment kind of the audience into, I wouldn't necessarily say like a narrow portion, but to be honest, I don't think that many people who are, looking to progress figure, physique, at that point, I don't think they're tuning into this. Just going off of the questions that I get and the experiences I've had with individuals who are kind of on the cusp of like, I think I'm too big for bikini. Should I go wellness or even figure? That's my jam. That's what I can speak to. So let's do a quick rundown. When we have bikini, when we look at that in isolation, and really, like, I'm going to do this for all divisions, so you can kind of look at the timestamps if you want to skip ahead. But there are, for each division, there's priority muscle groups. There's a shape that they're going for. There's a level of conditioning, a level of muscularity, and then really like what's big, like the thing that is really important to that division. And I'll just kind of like, I don't know, plug in anecdote and other things I think are important as I go through. So when we start with bikini, the two priority muscle groups are going to be the glutes and the delts. Like now at the point at the pro level, there's kind of this understanding that like there are athletes who are on the smaller side who are being told increase your quads, increase your leg size, but it's a very narrow therapeutic index. It's a very small margin for which that individual needs a little bit more leg and then can overdo it. Also something that should be stated, and like it's not like directly written in stone, but it's just kind of understood, is that there are times when like people are given feedback, like in bikini, like you need more quad, you need more muscle, and really like what the judges are kind of speaking to might not always be like the quad itself. It's more like, this is how your quad's showing up and presenting relative to the rest of your physique. So in reality, it's like you could make other improvements to enhance your physique, and maybe that's like not coming in as conditioned. Maybe that's coming in a little denser collectively overall, not just like building up your quads. So that's where on some level you kind of have to read between the lines, because it's not always one-to-one in terms of like what you were told in terms of judges' feedback and what you should actually do to get to that goalpost. So when we look at wellness, the priority muscle groups, glutes, quads, hamstrings, and still some shoulder presence. So it's like they essentially want the upper body that we emulate in bikini. Like upper body in both bikini and wellness are virtually the same. I think honestly wellness can get a little bit more, they can get away with a little bit more upper body. It's not as something that you're scrutinized on, whereas in bikini, I do feel like there is a threshold, whereas if your upper body is imbalanced to your lower body or to your frame, they'll just dock you down. So with wellness, glutes, quads, hamstrings, I mean, that is like the trio. They want all of those things. And realistically, like I've seen competitors who have like gnarly glutes, don't have a ton of quads or hams, and they don't perform as well. So it's not just a matter of being a bikini competitor and like letting yourself go when it comes to like, I don't know, leg size. Like you need really round muscle bellies in the lower body for wellness. And like really, like we're talking like balloon animal, like really inflated, exaggerated quads and hamstrings. Now, on the flip side, I do see some bikini competitors move up to wellness because they're being told, X, Y, and Z. And they didn't really have the glutes for bikini, but they're just like, I'm going to train quads and I'll fit wellness. And yet they find when they go to wellness, it's the same shit. It's like you're told basically, you need more glutes. So it's something to keep in mind, is like, if you're making that progression incrementally from bikini to wellness, it's like, you should almost be at the upper end of muscularity, particularly in the glutes, because that is such an important muscle group. It's a priority muscle group for wellness. And okay, when we talk about figure, I just want to give a big disclaimer. Like, this is not my forte. I'm commenting on my understanding of it, but if I'm wrong, like I'm inviting you to tell me where I'm wrong. I will not take offense to it. I'd rather know like, oh, actually, no, they focus on this and this. What I will say is that, feedback can be subjective, and different people can be told like, oh, in order to do better, you need this, this, and this. So I'm just going to speak to it just generally, and hopefully you guys will be very forgiving, because like the goal here isn't to misinform, obviously. It's to just give you kind of, I don't know, a barometer of like, okay, if this is bikini on this end, wellness is here. And I guess it really isn't even on the same spectrum because they're different looks, which we're going to talk about. So figure, bear with me. Priority muscle groups, back, delts, quads are important. And I would simply describe this as very much like an upside down triangle. The waist in all three of these divisions, they want very small. So I kind of like challenge this idea that like, oh, your waist is too big for bikini, so you should go to wellness or figure. like, I understand like the idea is, well, if your waist is too big, maybe then you can build out other body parts that if you were to build them out now, you'd be too big for bikini. Sure. But at the same time, like, figure competitors need a really freaking small waist. They can create that illusion better because they can create a really hefty and developed upper body. But I've worked with a handful of figure competitors, not at the highest level. But even then it's like, okay, how are we improving the conditioning in your lower body when you're in your back pose? It's like, you're going to need glutes as well. So it's not to say that when I'm like referencing priority muscle groups, it's not to say that like figure doesn't need hamstrings, that they don't need triceps, like chest. I'm not getting that nuanced. And like now as I'm recording this, I'm beginning to regret not talking to Stephanie beforehand and being like, hey, like, will you weigh in on this? We're just going to power through though. But really what I'm trying to highlight by these priority muscle groups is, if you think of like the shape that we're creating with this, bikini is very much like an hourglass. Wellness, even though you have up top, it's more bottom heavy, and I did not do well in geometry, so I am not going to try to fathom what shape that is. But you could even say like it's a triangle. It's like super bottom heavy compared to upper body, which even in bikini, it's pretty freaking bottom heavy. Like, there are some people very much who like could go do wellness with their glutes if they added enough size to their quads and hams. And like, even at the national level right now, like, it's getting really gnarly. It's very impressive, but like the level of glutes that we're seeing in bikini is very competitive. So anyways, figure, like, I've heard people say like, more of an X frame, but really like when I look at the physiques, like I'm seeing an upside down triangle. Now there's also aspects within figure when we're talking about their back details, like, okay, it's not just enough to have lats. Whereas in bikini, it's like, you can have lats, you don't really need a ton of teres. Like, you don't need huge rear delts, you don't need erectors, you don't need traps. All of these things would actually harm you and make you potentially look overly developed, overly muscled. So I would almost think about it with these priority muscle groups is like, if you're someone who loves training back and that's your jam and like you enjoy it, and like not training back would be something that would negatively impact you. Like, it would make you not enjoy training. That's a consideration here. Now I'm starting to think of other questions like, wait, I know like, yeah, tricep, rear delt, there's something going on there, but realistically, like that look in figure, they want something that's very tapered. Now, when we go to conditioning, that is going to be pretty different. So within bikini, there absolutely are points where like top athletes are judged down, more marked down because they're too conditioned. I'm not a top athlete. I'm a professional athlete, but I'm, working my way up the ranks. Being too dry, being too vascular, which are things that I have been marked down for. You kind of have to find the balance of like, okay, if we're going for balance in bikini, it's not just about muscular development. It's also, how do we create enough muscle in the back, like on the posterior chain, so that you don't have to get ultra shredded in the front or in the upper body. And you can still see like the tie-ins, because the tie-ins are really the thing that like, you can't do well if you don't have very deep and projected glutes. Now, even if you have those deep and projected glutes, and you have good shape, if you're overly conditioned, if you have crazy vascularity, which these are things that also can be affected by your peaking process. So it's also worth considering like, what is like your propensity to, yes, build muscle, but then also to lose fat. Do you lose fat very quickly? Where do you store body fat? Do you store body fat in an area that is actually, it's not going to be super favorable now? Because like in the case where I'm thinking of a few athletes who, love them, but like they store body fat in their stomach, and like it's not that they have big waist, it's just like that's the last to go. And it's not necessarily that their waist needs to be much leaner than they get, but at the cost of getting their waist to that lean, their legs and their upper body get ultra shredded. And that's just something that like genetically, like you weren't dealt the best hands. And like, it's amazing because you see those athletes, they have a lot to overcome with that because they need to strike that balance of conditioning and body fat. Now, when we look at conditioning for wellness, these athletes are, I would say, just as lean, if not maybe even leaner in some cases. They're not ultra shredded like figure. Figure, they get fucking peeled. Like it's crazy. Wellness, like some of those athletes come in like super hard and like you see the vascularity. But the fullness and the projection in the lower body, that is huge. So there's like a few athletes I'm thinking of that have, progressed from bikini up into wellness, or even just athletes who are in wellness on the smaller side compared to the average. And it's like for them, in order for them to get their tie-ins to show, like the level of muscle that they have is on the lower side compared to others. So ultimately, they're getting super, super lean and they're actually losing some of that fullness and that pop to their muscle bellies, making it to where they look really impressive, yes, and very streamlined, but almost too lean, almost stringy. And I wouldn't say stringy to the point of like bikini, like how I've looked on stage. I've looked fucking stringy. But when it comes to really like differentiating, I would say like in bikini, there are individuals who can show up too lean and like by chance they can get awarded because there are people that show up that they just frankly look better than for this, that, or the other. Whereas in wellness, what I see more often than not is that individuals who are a little too lean aren't necessarily rewarded compared to those who have like that ultra deep glute ham tie-in and really full and bubbly quads. And that's where like, I mean, trust me, like the girls in wellness, like a lot of them look way leaner than what I've seen in bikini. And like you can look at the criterias for all these divisions and be like, well, we have it listed out. Shouldn't it be like this? And yeah, it should. But it ultimately kind of depends on who shows up that day and how they present their physique and whether their peak was right on point. Like you can take athletes who have a lot of density and a lot of fullness, but like they peaked poorly or they peaked in a way that they didn't intend to. And now because of that, they look either too lean or too soft. And even in some cases, you can come in too soft and be rewarded for it in very much like several of these divisions. So what about figure? I will say I've seen conditioning win, but you absolutely have to have like a certain threshold of conditioning. Like if you're on the lower side, and what I mean lower, I don't actually mean lower body fat. If you're on the higher body fat side relative to your group that you're called out in, that can absolutely affect your placing, but it's kind of dependent on like where you're storing that body fat, how it affects your shape, whether or not it's body fat or a little bit of water. I've seen individuals who are not as crisp and dry, but have really good pop. And it's like, even though they might have like this film of water, the detail is good and it's there, but it's not quite as sharp and flat as a different competitor that they might be competing against. Whereas I've seen individuals who've come in and like just played the conditioning game hard. And realistically, like you can only do that to a certain extent before it then negatively impacts you. So within the figure division, it's like the baseline, like I want to say like the worst, like the least conditioned person on stage, the person at the highest body fat, they're probably not going to do well unless they have like crazy structure, crazy muscle bellies. I think like Sid is someone who is a great example, who she has so much fullness and pop and her shape just flows really well together, so that like there are absolutely girls that are leaner or come in a little bit drier or have different kind of components or details to their physique. But realistically, she has it all. Like she doesn't need to come in that lean because she might actually be sacrificing other aspects that enhance her physique and make it very competitive and elite. So it's really kind of dependent on like where you store the muscle, if there is like intentional fullness that you're pushing, how that actually translates in relative to the people that you're competing against. And what I'll say, because I made some notes in like kind of preparing for this one, the waistline in wellness, I see in some ways being sacrificed in order to push fullness and projection. And this isn't all competitors, but I do think that they're a little bit more forgiving, maybe given the proportions and the ratios. But you do see, and I'm not talking about Issa, I'm talking about like at various levels, like there are competitors that get awarded that might not have the smallest waist. And with that same logic, I'm saying like there are individuals with the smallest waist who are not awarded. So it's not a small waist competition and the biggest glutes competition and that wins. I think even in wellness, like there is some degree of fullness that they're pushing that if you don't have, even if your waist is super tiny, they might mark you down for that. And just to kind of like close the loop on the conditioning, because like I feel like talking about figure, like I started to think of aspects within bikini that are important to mention. There are people who will get marked down for being too conditioned. There also get people who are marked down for not being conditioned enough. I would vastly say you are going to do better and likely place better if you are more conditioned than playing it safe. And that's kind of the trap I've fallen into a few times where I'm like, I would rather be way too lean, and they get told that. And I've overshot in conditioning department and I've still done pretty freaking well, versus coming into full. I've done roughly the same because the competition I was competing against, they were very, very tight, very lean. So I think honestly, it just depends on who shows up. And if you take 10 girls, you don't really want to be the leanest or the softest. You don't want to be the most muscular or the least muscular. You want to kind of collectively be somewhere in the middle. And this obviously completely depends on where that muscle is and what your conditioning is like and how you present your physique. And if everything else is like attended to and they just generally like your presentation, all these things matter, but this is where it can become very subjective and very difficult to delineate. Here's why this competitor did better, even though both competitors were very similar, and like the one who maybe didn't win or place higher technically had more muscle or was more conditioned. So what about muscularity? Now, within the bikini division, this is semi-defined. I mean, like there is technically a ceiling that we refer to, but I would say this is specific to bis and tris, quads, even hamstring, not really ever on glutes. And the reason like we have bis and tris, I would say like, also delts too. I mean, like I'm telling you, like I have a 42-inch like clavicle circumference. It's not clavicle circumference, shoulder circumference, but like my clavicles are very broad. They measure 42 inches. And it's like, if we're trying to create an hourglass and my glutes are 36, that is no longer an hourglass, that's an upside down triangle. And realistically, it's like, okay, if I were to keep developing my delts and my rear delts and my back even more, I would begin to start to look very top heavy, which is ultimately what we want to avoid for the bikini division. We want that balance. Now, when we start talking about upper body dominance, this is something I think a lot of people, they mistake when they first get into the sport. They're like, oh no, bikini is balanced. There's not like these priority muscle groups, so we need to train everything. We need to train chest, we need to train quads, we need to train biceps and triceps. And listen, I get training bis and tris, like it's fun, but that will take away from the overall like taper of your delts, like how your delt actually cuts into your shoulder. And if you have more bis and tris and you continue to build out your delts, you're going to start to look very upper body dominant. And I would say that ceiling is much lower than the individual who, let's say, is building out their glutes exclusively, less on their legs, who eventually, could be told like, oh, you're lower body dominant. That's a lot easier to downsize than your upper body, in my opinion. I'll say I never train biceps or triceps. I just don't. And some people have commented, they're like, oh, well, like you need some meat on you. You need your upper. It's like, probably shouldn't, because I already have a very upper body, a very dominant upper body come stage time, just given the fact that like I have vascularity, I have good separation, and the muscle on my delts is already very eye catching. So sure, like if you have someone with clavicle width that's not as wide, and like generally like they're more inverted like that, like they don't go straight across, it's more downwards, they might need that additional upper body oomph, I guess, to be scientifically speaking. Realistically, I don't want to have to do a lot of makeup work. I don't want to be in a position where I'm like, oh, I can't train back because my biceps might take over and I can't have these grow. That's where you have to be pretty strategic with how you put muscle on your physique. Now, in the pursuit of really full glutes for either bikini or wellness, you are going to probably build some legs. And I very much have built some legs this past year. Luckily for me, I had a lot of room to build up my legs so that they're still in pretty good proportion with my glutes. But what I'll say is that quads are something that like can be a little finicky. So if you're developing like the lower part of your quad or even the upper part of your quad, this can heavily distort your shape in bikini and can actually make it harder for you to find that balance, more of like that ice cream cone shape that people refer to. We don't need it very angular. We don't need like this low hanging quad that comes out and like forms an angle, which is the definition of angular. And realistically, the more upper quad that you have, you're probably going to find that it can become very distracting, especially if you don't store a lot of body fat in your legs to begin with. You might begin to see more of that detail that ultimately then does take away from that very, I would say, like balanced physique hourglass that we're going for. So I would say bikini compared to wellness or figure, there is more of a ceiling, more of a cap, a cutoff with like how much muscle you can build on specific body parts. So realistically, like you do need to be strategic there. Whereas when we look at wellness, like yes, that ceiling is semi-defined, but this is largely going to be dependent on your ratios of your upper to your lower. So oftentimes I see wellness girls who like upper body is huge. It's exploding and they're continuing to train their upper body really hard. And maybe they have leeway. Maybe they can really get away with adding a little bit more size up top because ultimately it's going to create the look that they're going for, that they've been told they need to attain. I think that it's easy to get away with that when your lower body is so dominant and so developed that it can actually look kind of wonky if your upper body is less developed. So in the case like bikini, you have people who are on maybe the wispier side, like they don't have as much cappage. So nothing's like kind of cornering off the upper portion of their physique. And in the case of wellness, like there's a few competitors that are just very petite, very narrow hips, but this in itself kind of bites them in the ass because it's like, okay, so even if you build out your upper body like full capacity, like rear delts, teres, lats, traps, it's still not going to create the balance that you would need relative to the size that you either have or are going to have on the lower, just because of how much like shape you're bringing to the legs themselves. Now, I'll just step back. Bikini and wellness, it's very rare that someone is told that their glutes are too big. The only person that I've ever heard like them be told to bring down their glutes was Laura Lee. And I mean, like her glutes were ridiculous. Like they were so dense. And I forget what year this was, if it was 21 or 22. But she's done a good job like shaping them and making them fit her physique. And like, to be clear, I don't know what like her feedback was or the approach or the reasoning there, but that was someone I know like at a specific point, they were like, yeah, like you have the ability to come in denser. But some of the feedback from the judges was very much like they're a little too dominant currently. Now, what I'll say, that even being a few years ago, now I'm looking at the glutes and I'm like, yo, like these are ridiculous. Like these are so dense, so unreasonably dense compared to the leg. And that's like, it's an interesting thing about bikini that I'm seeing now is I'm like, it's not just a matter of they want the visible tie-in, but they want that without the conditioning of the legs, which, I mean, is going to be interesting to see how that plays out this year because like they've kind of pushed everyone towards bigger glutes. And like a lot of people have gotten away with being more conditioned. So even just like looking at the Arnold, which wasn't that long ago at the time of recording this, it's like there is absolutely a shift that they're going for this year. In terms of who's being awarded. And it seems like they're really cracking down on the conditioning. But ironically, they're also not like capping off the amount of glute that they want. So that's for a separate video. Anyways, now I'm gonna be honest. I don't know if there is a semi-defined ceiling for figure. My take on it is that it's largely based on balance and proportions to other body parts. I have spoken with a lot of professional women's physique competitors who have come down, like they are competitive in women's physique and they've intentionally gone down to figure because they're like, I don't have to continue growing in figure. Like I actually don't even have to lose muscle. Whereas like in physique, I'm going to have to put on a lot more muscle and really like spend time doing that or use a lot of drugs to do that, even more than what they're comfortable with. So I'm kind of extrapolating here, but I'm like, that tells me that there is opportunity for what once was the standard for women's physique, that kind of meshing with figure. And again, like I don't fucking know. I'm literally just going off what I see and like how people are judged at the professional level and at the Olympia. But I'd be really curious if there are individuals who, are doing well, who are just strictly told, like, don't build out your delts anymore, or don't build out your glutes, don't build out your quads. I'm sure it's happened, and I'm sure there are specific cases, but I would also then wonder is like how much of this has to do with like global balance of the physique, and are there other things that like the judges have tried to say like, hey, we want this, but inadvertently that would also mean like not building more muscle in these areas. So really the whole point of making this video is to help you understand where you fit. Because this is a much different question than the video I did around fit model versus bikini. These divisions, they're different physiques, they have different criterias, and they require a much different level of commitment. So this is kind of how I would approach an assessment. Why do you believe you've outgrown bikini? And within this, like, I really want to understand, is it because your coach wants you to like push the envelope? Because I'm very skeptical. I'm very protective over clients and like the coach relationship. And I oftentimes find, like, I'll just say, like, I've had girls who have worked with coaches and they've done well in bikini, but that coach wants them to do wellness because that coach wants a wellness competitor. And this is a person that's pretty easy to coach. So they've just like pushed them in that direction, told them like, yeah, you would do well here, without really considering whether or not it's what the athlete wants, or if the athlete is fully on board with the commitment it would take to go from bikini to wellness. So that's like the first starting point. Why do you believe that bikini isn't a good fit? Is it the fact that like you're having to back off training entirely because like you're consistently told that like you are too dense? Is it the fact that judges have told you like you don't have a bikini shape, like you have way too much quad, or you don't have, the ability to downsize your upper body so you'd actually be better suited for figure? Guys, like I had an Olympian male athlete who was a coach tell me like few years ago, I think last year, he was like, yeah, like whenever you're done like messing around with that bikini, like hit me up, like I'll turn you into a figure pro. I'm like, that's and like it was a very weird kind of interaction, but it was like he strictly was talking, he's like, yeah, your waist to your clavicles, like that makes sense, but like that was the extent of it. So I've also, I mean, like this is probably what I should have led with, is that I've done well in wellness. Like when wellness came out, like I won the overall at the California State. I was 135 pounds, I think, maybe a little less than that. Like I was not super conditioned. I was not super dense, at a small waist, had good shape. And like the division was brand new. So the competition just frankly wasn't there. And in that process of deciding, do I want to go bikini? Do I want to go wellness? One of the things that kind of replayed in my head was I had many judges tell me like you should do wellness. I had my coach at the time tell me like, yeah, you could technically do either. But really what I was missing are these next several questions. How hard have you tried to gain muscle? Have you used PEDs to get where you are? What's your stance on using PEDs? What's your limit? And would you be okay if this took a really long time and a lot of work? So I'm going to go through each one of these. How hard have you tried to gain muscle? This is so important. I know so many athletes who leapfrogged right over bikini because they're like, no disrespect, not my thing. I don't like the look. I like big muscles. I like to be dense. And I'm telling you, like some of these girls, like I saw them come up and I'm like, you don't even have enough muscle to be competitive in bikini, let alone wellness. Like you're going to have to use so many drugs. You're going to have to spend a lot of time, and you're probably going to get to the point where even then, even with the drugs, even with the time, even with, molding your physique, it's probably not going to be a physique that truly emulates what you're imagining for wellness. And I've seen this play out time and time again. I remember back in 22, 23, like I made a few videos just for Instagram talking about like girls who just were out of shape, who didn't have a lot of muscle, but had a lot of fat in their lower body. And frankly are like, yeah, I'm not bikini. Like I'm too dense for that. Only to find out that like they would diet down and they'd be like, shit, like my glutes might not be big enough for bikini. Also, this is something I can heavily relate to because for a long time, I thought I had more muscle than I did. I thought that my lower body was way more developed. I just thought my skin was thick. I just thought that I had trouble getting the last bit of fat off. A deficit works 100% of the time. And realistically, like I can tell you now, being on the other side of the build that I did last year and getting up to 152 pounds, I can now see this morning I was 143. I'm like, holy shit, like I've never looked this lean at this body weight. And I never imagined I could look this lean. Realistically, in the past, I've started preps lighter than this weight and I've been much, much fatter. And this isn't just me getting up on a soapbox and being like, meh, like, look what I've done. And really the reason I bring this up is that building muscle can take a long time. It can take a long time with or without drugs. And there's some people that frankly respond better to building. They have their ducks in a row. They are okay with seeing some weight gain. They can do all the things that they need to commit to that build phase. I'll tell you, like I have clients who right now are not big enough for bikini. And like, even at the sight of their scale weight going up 5 pounds, they're like, I'm ready to be done with this. Like, I'm ready to cut back down. Like, how low do you think my weight's going to have to be? And like, they just start spiraling. And realistically, it's not a bad thing to be, invested and understand what you're doing and like the extent to which you're going to gain weight and how much of it's muscle. But I can tell you that there's a type of person, which I myself have been this person at several points in my career, who is going to struggle more so with the weight gain. And that largely is going to be self-imposed. They're going to prevent themselves from gaining that much weight. And I think it was the point where I was working with John Jewett where we were like recapping some of the competitors that I was working with who were wellness and figure, and then others that he was working with. And I remember the conversation came up and he's like, you don't struggle to build muscle, but it's more the fact that you get in your own way, which is not something, he's not the only person that I've been told that by, but he's like, you wouldn't know how much muscle you can actually build because like you pump those brakes like really soon. And like, I think it's more of like, it takes like more of a mental toll on you. And realistically, I think that's something that you have to weigh in the case of like thinking of like, I'm going to go from bikini to wellness or even figure. It's like, that will take a level of mental commitment, especially if you struggle gaining muscle, because there's going to be a point in those other two divisions, wellness and figure, where you're probably going to have to do things that you're uncomfortable with. And I'm not limiting that to just PEDs. I'm more so just meaning like it's going to take a level of discomfort in like maybe even seeing your scale weight reach a new high. It's probably going to take sitting there for a good amount of time to really add like true size that's going to translate then to your next contest prep. So in the past, if you're like, hey, I have tried everything and like I hardly gain, this is something to consider. Is it worth committing to an endeavor that like frankly might take years even from where you are now to start to see some progress in the physique? And this is really the thing I would consider is like, if you are at the point where you've already used PEDs and you've already used them excessively and you've used them like for every aspect of this sport of gaining muscle, and you're in bikini, which, hey guys, like that's largely who I see on a consultation basis. It's people who are at the amateur level, national level, maybe starting out in their pro career, and they're like, I have never not used Anavar. Like I've only always had it in the off season and during my prep. What do you mean we're taking it out, or why would I take it out? If that's your starting point, and this isn't to knock people who are doing that, you have to know that like these other divisions in that case will likely require you to do the same thing at a higher dose for longer periods of time. And that's really where you have to understand that like if you are risk averse, I would strongly caution you from progressing and selecting one of these other two divisions without really careful consideration around what that's going to take. Now, I think like some of the other questions I asked in my last video around fit model versus bikini, I think they can still apply here as well. So I'm going to run through them. Have you competed before? If yes, what was your experience like getting to stage? Did it just completely ruin your life? Did you lose relationships? Did you lose your job? Are you in financial debt on account of what it took? Because guys, getting into figure stage condition is much harder. It takes more than getting into bikini stage condition. You could even say wellness is somewhere on the other side, maybe even somewhere in between. But realistically, you need to assess for yourself, what is the sacrifice, what is the cost associated with me doing these preps? And if you're picking a prep that's going to require more of a sacrifice, are you willing to make that commitment each and every time you get on stage? You also have to consider like muscularity too. So I talked about this with like relative to fit model to bikini, is like in someone who is trying to get on stage, let's say anywhere from 130 to 150 even, if that is their stage weight, they very much are going to be pushing 160, 170, maybe even 180. And especially if you're a tall competitor, like you could be pushing even past that. And I would definitely recommend checking out the episode I did with Stephanie Roth. But she's an IFBB figure pro, and she's very transparent about all aspects under the umbrella of what it takes to be a figure pro, what it takes to go through her builds. And I think she handles herself with a lot of grace. I think she carries herself with a lot of grace and handles some of these challenges that I really think that most women in these other divisions probably experience, but she's very transparent about it. She does share like, hey, seeing that scale weight, that might not always be her favorite thing. Having to sit a little bit heavier and really like get comfortable with the amount of growth that it's going to take for her to do well. Anyways, go listen to that. I think you'll enjoy it. The last thing I want to close out on, how strict do you have to be to maintain that muscle mass? Are you running a lot of drugs to hold this tissue? Are you able to eat off plan? Are you able to travel? Are you able to miss meals? Or do you run a super tight ship? And frankly, like any small deviations, any vacations, they throw you off instantly. Because yes, like it's a lot harder to gain muscle than to maintain it. But if you're in a division that is going to require a lot of muscle and it's very difficult for you to add it on, then this is going to be something I imagine you're going to be protective over retaining. You guys, I hope this was helpful. Whatever decision you decide to make, whatever division you decide to compete in, do so, own it, be informed. But if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If there's anything you want me to touch on further around this topic, let me know. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.